Anna Lührmann, Minister of State at the Federal Office in Germany, Mark Suzman, Chief Executive Officer and Board Member, the Gates Foundation, Marietje Schaake, International Policy Director, the Cyber Policy Center at the Stanford University, Vikram Misri, the Foreign Secretary of India, and the moderator and curator of Raisina, Samir Saran, President at the Observer Research Foundation. Before we start, I just want to check with the production desk if we are all good. Do I have a thumbs up? Okay.
Wow, we still have so many survivors. It's been fun, exciting, intense 2.5 days, and most of you merit a bravery award for being here for another panel discussion. But thank you, and I promise this will be short, precise, concise, and crisp. While we have the full length of a panel time, I'm not going to belabor the last panel. We are going to have Q&A with each of these wonderful speakers gathered here who've already been introduced. Uh, I'm going to ask them questions that this conference has thrown up over the last 2.5 days. And hopefully, in their responses, they will also help ORF set the agenda for next year and perhaps the panel descriptors that we must try and visualize in the next conversations we have in different parts of the world. So, in many ways, let me first start with Carl Bildt because uh, we did see a lot of Europe in this conference. Uh, I mean, don't laugh. I mean, Europe is good, yeah. They're good people, right, Carl? So, question to you: uh, What's the future of the security partnership of the Atlantic partners? What is the future of the NATO? And since Sweden is a NATO member, uh, what does NATO look like in this new world post January 21st?
Thank you, Samir. I have to disclose that I'm under strict instructions by Samir. He has forbidden me to mention a certain country because he thinks that I've been talking about it several times. NATO is related to problems that we have a historically with the country that is to the east of NATO. Um, and that will remain the case. But the world is a fairly volatile place. And I think if you should describe shortly the position of Europe at the moment, we are in between the tags of Putin and the tariffs of Trump. Both are rather fundamental challenges. The one is a challenge to our security, the other one is a challenge to our prosperity, if one exaggerates slightly. And while that problem with that unnamed country to the east is not is new in its dimensions, but is new. It's been there for a long time. Of course, we now have a question for the nature of the alliance, which is rather serious. Um, NATO is still there. I think NATO will remain, but the credibility of NATO as a security provider rests on the reliability and the credibility of the guy who happens to be in the Oval Office. And what I understand from media reporting is that there are questions on the reliability and credibility of the present incumbent, on how he would react in terms of the crisis. And then we have all of the tariff turmoil that is added to this particular situation. Now, Sabi, I managed not to mention that particular word.
No, I had asked Carl that can we attempt a thought experiment where we will not use the name of one country that you've used at least 1,500 times in the last 2.5 days. And he said, I will take it up, and he did it well.
Yeah,
So
I
applause to
succeed.
Carl for his fantastic time. Carl, let me ask you just one more question, just a follow-up question. Um, on the economic competitiveness, because I think the flip side of a security argument for Europe is a competitive European economy, and how is European economy realigning itself or rethinking about its role in the world? Is it buying into your political project?
Well, true. That is a major issue, and there's going to be, I think, starting tomorrow, as a matter of fact, there's another one of these regular meetings between the heads of state and government of the European Union. Competitiveness is the issue on the agenda. There's going to be a lot related to that unnamed country as well, but competitiveness is the issue on the agenda. There have been two major reports that have been commissioned, one by is both by former Italian prime ministers for different reasons, Letta and Draghi, with a lot of recommendations to increase the competitiveness. And that has to do with the fact that if we look at productivity, we've been falling behind the Americans for the last 20 years. But if you look at the details of it, it's quite interesting. We've been falling behind them on the digital sector. But the rest of the economy, we are doing as well or even marginally better than the Americans in our industrial sector. And one tend to forget when we discuss our competitiveness problems that in contrast to the US, for example, we don't have a big trade deficit with the world. We are competitive in the sense we have a trade surplus with the rest of the world, which shows that there's some strength. We are the second biggest industrial power in the world, well ahead of the Americans in that particular respect. We are the biggest trading partner of 80 countries around the world. China 120, United States 20. So we have a strength to build on, but we're also aware of the fact that we really need to do things to integrate more, invest more in research and development, have better conditions for entrepreneurship, and reach out even more in trading and economic partnerships agreement with the rest of the world. Because with due respect to the importance of the United States and its vibrant economy, most of the growth in the global economy in the decades ahead is going to be outside of that. And we need to be more present and more active and have better trade agreements there, India being very important.
I think you raised two important points: new geographies and opportunities, and how can Europe partner with those. And I think this is the right moment for Europe to actually start recognizing that a world exists out on the other side of the map. But also, I think the digital part. You guys are world champions on regulation. Now we have to try to be nimble and agile on innovation, and I think that's the challenge for Europe. But let me turn to Minister Anna Lührmann, and maybe just to follow up on my questions to Carl, because we also saw a fair degree of conversations on China during this conference. A number of questions from supply chains to what's happening in the Indo-Pacific, but even from a European perspective, uh, there was some musing, maybe some whispers, maybe also some expressions, loud expressions, on China now not being that bad an option for Europe. And many seeing this moment when there are tensions between the Atlantic cousins as a sign to perhaps deepen your already complex entanglements with China and perhaps move in the eastern direction. Is that something? How would you respond to that?
Well, I think our entanglement with China already is quite deep, and in some parts, actually so deep that poses a risk potentially also to us. So, to me, our China policy has to really follow the idea of de-risking. I just give you one example. We currently import 95% of our solar cells from China alone, 95%. And this is really something that in the future we need to diversify this and here build on strengthening existing friendships and partnerships like with India to the extent that we can actually work on these issues together. I hear that a solar industry is being built up here now. Export opportunities to the EU sound like a win-win situation for both sides, which is also why I'm so excited that the European Commission has been here with the whole collegium to underscore also this renewed interest in the EU in deepening relations with India. And to me, again, that also serves our common interest actually to diversify and to de-risk also from China. We are, as you said, our relationship with China is complicated. We have areas where we are competitors in the economic field. Here, I think we really need to have an end of naivete, because we currently see that in some areas you see over subsidies that actually then harm European industries. We see the China also as a systemic rival when it comes to the question of democracy and autocracy. Again, here we have a very close friend and partner with India. But we also see China in some areas as a partner, for instance, in the climate field. These 95% of solar cells coming from China enable us to do our transition. We have now in Germany 2/3 of our electricity production from renewables. And that is also thanks to Chinese solar cells, we have to say. And at the last COPs, we have also been cooperating quite well with China. So there's also this partnership element here, and a lot of room, though, due to this difference, I think, also in fundamental values, to strengthen other partnerships that I'm very much hope we will be able to do.
May I also ask you a follow up? We've heard from political leaders in Europe, governments in Europe, about the need to reassess and perhaps reset um, your arrangements with the neighbor across the Atlantic. We've also heard of similar pronouncements on China, and it's a risk, but also a partner in certain aspects. How much do your people buy into these political statements we hear coming out of Brussels and coming out of the capitals in your country? Uh, are they signed on to? Are they willing to make the sacrifices? Are they willing to readjust and reset their economic and social architecture completely? Are your companies willing to do it? Because when I go back to your continent for certain conversations like these, I think many of your companies are doubling down, and they may be disagreeing with the statements that are coming out of your capitals with their actions in some sense. So, how does a EU perspective play out when it comes to the European cities and people?
Well, as always in democracies, there's no unified answer to this. There's a plurality of opinions on this matter. And I mean, we just had elections in Germany where those parties that clearly support our current course of action also on regarding Ukraine and regarding this country that apparently may not be named here, we have clearly won the election in with about 75-80% of the vote share. So I think that's a very, very clear mandate from the German public to continue with the course of strengthening the European Union, strengthening also our defense policies. I mean, we've just came here yesterday after voting in the parliament for the biggest defense package, I think, in German history, right? So that means we have, as politicians, I think, in Europe, we have now understood what is at stake, and that we really need to get our act together, that we need to invest more in defense, that we need to invest more also in our global partnerships, right? Like with India. But of course, in the general public, there are also those voices that say, maybe there's a more comfortable way, or the companies that say, oh, but I make so much profit out of this and that. And here I really think we really need to be, to understand that actually our common democratic values currently are under attack by an actor that is in war mode. And if we want to compete with that, we as societies also need to really get our act together, be more competitive in many ways, innovate, maybe not only regulation, but also products. And I think all that comes together. But I also think it's really feasible. We are in the European Union such a strong economy. We have so many advantages. We have social stability. And I think if we get our act together, and it's not too late for that, then we can be strong, build partnerships around the globe, and come out of this also with a strong multilateral order.
Thank you, Minister. Let me turn to Mark. Mark, another set of issues that we discussed in the last 2 days were the climate, development, specifically the SDGs and the future of the challenges that many of us face in both adaptation terms, but also in terms of meeting our goals, our existing development goals. So my question to you is that in a world that is so disinterested in some sense with the importance of development goals today on lifting people out of poverty, meeting the health, nutrition, and other requirements, how do you align the work that you folks have been doing, Mark, and many of others like you have been investing into for so long uh, in this particular moment? How do you align those ambitions with the current realities where everyone is in war mode? You just heard that, right? Over the last 2.5 days, everyone is gearing up with defense budgets, artilleries, and tanks, and tariffs, and everything else. Uh, where does development figure in this world?
Yeah. Well, thank you. And that is, I think, the most critical question that this planet is facing right now. That you can talk about hard issues, the tariffs and tanks, and those are critically important. But really, the world is about people. I know that sounds, and from a Raisina, but it is about people. It's about human development. And nowhere is that point proven more clearly than in India's progress over the last 25 years. It's the 25th anniversary of the Gates Foundation. It's one of the reasons why I've been here this week. And you can see India has lifted 400 million people out of extreme poverty, cut child mortality and maternal mortality by more than 2/3. In fact, globally, in the first 2 decades of the 21st century before COVID, we saw a halving of child mortality worldwide. And that is across all parts of the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America. We saw massive improvements in poverty reduction. There was a huge global progress that lasted 2 decades that came to an abrupt halt with the COVID shock, linked to then debt and other related issues. And frankly, this year, with a pullback from the global north, I will say, in terms of its commitment and solidarity with the global south, and that cuts across Europe and the United States, we are seeing significant setbacks. There may be the greatest human development crises of the last quarter century happening this year, coming through as a result of those challenges. There are moments to step up. The European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the president, is going to be co-hosting with my chair, Bill Gates, the Gavi replenishment at the next European Council Heads of State meeting in June. The Gavi Vaccine Alliance is an entity, a multilateral entity, that I would argue is the most successful multilateral initiative of the 21st century by far. It has saved millions of children's lives by providing vaccines to low-income countries, building on the prowess, I would say, of Indian companies. Over 60% of the world's vaccines are now supplied by Indian companies, low-cost, highly effective vaccines. That kind of progress fits below the radar screen right now, and it's almost dismissed. It's very difficult to get it into the public dialogue amidst all of that tariff and tanks discussion. And I don't want to dismiss it, but I think there is both a real need, because those needs are very pressing right now, and the uncertainty in the global multilateral architecture only makes that more challenging. So if you take the example of the World Health Organization, it would be a test question for this audience. I know that's not WHO, isn't it? But the United States has pulled out of the World Health Organization and cut its funding. Do you know who the largest funder of WHO now is? It is the Gates Foundation. We are larger than any sovereign state. Thank you for the applause, but I think that's a very sad testimony on the state how the world values a critical issue of global public health when we've just been through a pandemic that caused $16 trillion of economic damage and killed 20 million people. This is a misallocation of global priorities. I was part of a panel for the Indonesian G20 that came up with a proposal that said the world for $10 billion a year could put in place an ecosystem that would prevent any future global pandemic. We could do the science, the surveillance, the vaccine manufacturing, the treatments. That a pretty cheap insurance policy. At the time, hundreds of billions are being spent on defense. What has the world put into that? Over 5 years, the total has been $1.7 billion from everyone's contributions put into a World Bank Trust Fund. This is a fundamental misallocation of priorities. The next global pandemic could be far, far more dangerous than COVID. And the global development crises that we're facing right now will kill many, many more people than are being at risk in the country that you name in other wars. And so I do think there is a call to action there. And I will say there is an optimistic take too. And I'll say this is that we are on the cusp of an innovation revolution, which I know AI is used in every conference and it's often overstated, but there really is a transformative moment around how you do tools in health, in education, in agricultural development, which can fundamentally transform and accelerate development even in the midst of these challenges. And so that is another area where I think India has a global role to play, the European Union has a global role to play, but we need to make sure these issues are not forgotten and sort of swept under the carpet amidst the preoccupation with others.
No, but thank you for informing lots of us that it's actually a private philanthropy that's now going to be supporting the largest supporter of the World Health Organization. But that leads me to my question to you: that in this politically charged moment, when countries and national governments are seeking to direct how all of us act, does philanthropy have the liberty and the ability to continue to deploy to critical sectors, or is political pressure going to force them to divert funds to those that suit the national imperative at that time? So, is your larger goal of development going to be hamstrung by national imperatives of the headquarter or of the country where you're headquartered, for example?
Uh, the short answer is just that's uh, I think it's a false proposition when you put it like that, because philanthropy, we are the world's largest philanthropy by payout by a large margin. Our budget this year will be 8.75 billion US dollars in grants, and we will go up to $9 billion next year. That is a fraction of even existing total overseas development assistance is over $200 billion US. We're a rounding error. Philanthropy cannot possibly substitute for government or multilateral. Yes, we do have space to operate. We will pay, but philanthropic capital at its best can only ever be catalytic. It can take risks that private capital and public capital may not. Private capital because it's incentivized to get a return and won't prioritize the needs of the poorest. Public capital because it's very difficult to take taxpayer dollars, whether you're Germany or India, and make mistakes when you're trying out a new health program or a new education program. We can play that. We can de-risk it. We can prioritize some of the pioneering innovations in health and other technologies. But there's no substitute in the end for governmental public support to take any of these opportunities to scale. And the question, I think, is a global question rather than a US question. Will those resources be there? What is the future of a multilateral approach, to bring it right back to your point about the MDGs and the SDGs, which I know are often seen as very soft goals, and are they realistic? And yes, they're well off track right now, but the Millennium Development Goals and that goal of poverty reduction and health were actually broadly met in the first 15 years of the 21st century. The current goals are off track because there is a massive underinvestment in what essentially are not just global public goods. Disease surveillance and pandemic preventiveness is good for everybody, but also we think a set of broad global values. In the end, the goals were goals that every government in the world made as a commitment to their own citizens. And again, we're not a sovereign, we're a philanthropy. But we do think it's good, helpful often to shine a mirror back at sovereigns and a government and saying, remember, there are these commitments that you've made, and it is fundamentally about human beings and human opportunity.
Thank you, Mark. Let me turn to Marietje. Marietje, who's a fellow at Stanford and an author of a New York Times bestseller, Tech Coup. And technology has been a big focus of this conference, from AI to regulation to partnerships and cooperation. So let me ask you a couple of questions on technology, with your permission, Marietje. Uh, JD Vance, in his address recently, said that without greater freedom for tech companies, the West will fall behind on innovation and competitiveness. My question to you is: has the backlash against big tech gone too far, or is there still space for regulation?
So my question would be, what backlash? American tech companies are more powerful and less regulated now than they have been over the past decades. I smile, but with a bitter undertone when I hear that the Trump administration is going to have a deregulatory agenda vis-a-vis tech, because there was hardly any regulation. But what I miss in the discussion, where there's often a false dichotomy between innovation and regulation, is the question of innovation for what and regulation for what. Because we are now seeing a mantra coming out of the United States, both Silicon Valley and Washington, that are increasingly in a sort of symbiotic relationship where it's not even clear who is steering who anymore. But the idea that innovation is the highest goal in a society or of a government is, of course, false. Governments have multiple responsibilities to trade off against each other. We've talked about national security here today, very prominently on our minds, unfortunately, these days. But think also about protecting fundamental rights, the public interest, questions of who should be in charge of curating our information ecosystem, trust in democracy, in information, whether it's about vaccines, climate change, or geopolitics. And this whole idea that innovation is going to lead to the best outcomes without considering what else needs to be catered for and what the potential risks of that innovation are is a very dangerous narrative that I think will have ripple effects from Washington all over the world. It was the AI CEOs, the tech CEOs, that warned all of us that the breakthroughs in AI were reaching such dangerous levels that they were asking for regulation. This is less than 2 years ago. And now we have this deregulatory agenda. But similarly, I think a lot of the comments about regulation are very shallow. Regulation can lead us to all kinds of outcomes. It's politics, whether we agree with one direction or the other. But for some solutions, we will need more regulation. For example, to make the EU more competitive, as you asked to Carl earlier in this panel, there's a lot of focus now on the need to deregulate, cut red tape, but the crux of the matter is that if you want more easy access to capital for entrepreneurs, you will need to regulate to overcome differences between 27 member states. So I think we've reached a point where one-liners will not do justice to that reality. And I would encourage everybody to ask many more critical questions about innovation for what and regulation for what. And we need not feel sorry for US tech companies. They have a lot of space, too much space, if you ask me, to do as they please, that they are actually now governing many of us with the decisions that they make, but without a democratic mandate and without democratic accountability.
Maybe all of us can put a smiley emoji on Instagram right now. So, no, but Marietje, just taking that trail of thought forward. AI, you mentioned AI, and we can see two large AI centers, two large giants emerging. You, of course, have the leader in terms of the United States of America, and you are a fellow at the Stanford Center, and you've probably engaged with lots of them. But there is also a significant Chinese AI offering now on the horizon, if not already in the market. So, in that sense, there is very clearly a, a slightly regulatory lax mercantilist American offering on the table, and there is a Communist Party of China offering on the other side. There are two big offerings on the table. Where are people likely to go, or could there be third, fourth, and fifth options? And how and where are they likely to emerge from?
Well, you're allowing me to mention that I thought there was little talk about Europe as a tech player, and of course, Europeans think of themselves as developing a model of regulation, much more based on fundamental rights, risk prevention, whether it is in the field of security or threats to fundamental rights and democracy. This is a dynamic field, and I would much prefer that we don't think about competing models, but that we try to think about where we can find common ground between them. Because actually, the way technology spreads around the world, even if there are huge efforts to prevent this spread, look at what the US is trying to do to prevent China from getting ahead with AI and doesn't seem to be working very well. In fact, it may actually accelerate domestic innovations as an alternative to access to global markets. And so keeping in mind these cautions of the world's leading AI experts, that this is such fundamental technology that it will have risks for all of us if we do not put up guardrails. I would love to see more focus, even as the world is unfortunately fracturing in dangerous ways, where we can find each other to not just think about tariffs and the restriction of access to microchips and that sort of, trade approach, but also how must we restrict and control our behavior with this technology as states, as private companies, as organizations, as individuals. And I think there's room for common ground, even if the regulatory models, state-led in China, freedom for markets and CEOs in the United States, and more focus on regulatory direction in the EU to protect fundamental rights and fairness in the markets, for example, that there still is overlap. And I hope that the countries that believe in this, which we saw unprecedented stepping up of governments to govern AI, collaboration at the G20, at the UN, at the OECD, at the Council of Europe. There are so many places, multilateral fora, where there's actually helpful and collaborative thinking going on, that I think even without the United States, countries, and I hope India will be a player here too, should not be discouraged from progressing with that multilateral work to try to prevent the worst kind of behavior from having devastating impact on all of us.
Thank you. Let me now turn to the Foreign Secretary. So, if we were to have our own conversations, there would, of course, be some who believe that the direction we embarked on in 2023, when the nation promised to itself that we would be a developed country by 2047, that we were heading in a direction that was fast, not fast enough, and we would have critiques and we would have observation on what needs to be done to get there. But the fact was, there seemed to be a general agreement on the journey that we were undertaking, the optimism on getting there, and of course appreciation of the hurdles and bottlenecks and challenges that we will need to overcome. It was largely a story of a transition from 5 trillion to 10 trillion to 15 trillion. But in many ways, if you host a Raisina dialogue and call the Europeans and Americans into the room, the world gets more complicated. And in that sense, sitting today, how confident are you about that journey we started in 2023 of being a developed country by 2047? After hearing all these discussions, how do you assess India's progress to where it wants to be?
So let me begin by saying that when I was listening to Mark talk about the advances that India has made in certain fields of public health, and the impact cumulatively that has on global metrics of public health. And I would say that the growth and development journey that India is embarked on through Viksit Bharat, developed India by 2047, cannot but have, because of the sheer scale at which things happen in India, cannot but have a systemic impact on global metrics as a whole. And I'm convinced that in a net sense, that'll be a positive impact. And therefore, the journey that India is embarked on through Viksit Bharat 2047 is something that not only all of us in India, but the world should have a stake on in the success of that. If you look at Viksit Bharat, I think it's worthwhile casting an eye on what the design of Viksit Bharat is. It's striking to see the kind of determination and application that is being deployed in making Viksit Bharat a reality. The scale is awesome. The manner in which it is being pursued is particularly striking across multiple agencies at multiple levels. The attention that it receives at the highest level of government, combined with the attention to granular detail These are, I would say, pretty unprecedented in terms of medium to long-term horizon planning in India that any plan or program has seen. So what we are seeing today is the government, in a sense, institutionalizing ambition and aspiration at the very heart of government itself. Everybody who's today part of any department now has visibility and transparency across 25 different departments on what is likely to happen in 25 years' time. There is, in a sense, a blueprint falling into place across the domains of commerce, finance, technology, resources, the social sectors, health, education, and of course, foreign policy, security, defense, and strategic interests as well. But the really important thing is that you have the contours of strategy falling into place. And we need to, of course, from the foreign policy perspective as well, contribute to that by finding international partnerships, whether it's for trade or technology, resources, skills, etc. Now, as everybody knows, and I think this is what is at the heart of your question, um, all strategy has to survive first contact with reality. And if I look from my perspective, I mean, obviously there will be developments in the domestic sphere, but since I look more, spend most of my day looking at the international plane, uh, what I see is that the trends that were already underway in 2023 have not gone away. In certain senses, they have sharpened. Uh, Conflict in different parts of the world is still with us. The contestation over technology has only become sharper. The crisis in terms of climate or growth or development has become perhaps even more acute, and especially in countries of the global south, which, I'm sure their voices have been heard here, would essentially be saying to the global north that, can we get beyond the conflict, please? And start paying attention to the problems of the vast majority of humanity. But I think in that process, what we have to do and what I think we benefit from, what gives us inspiration, is that we have lots of positives in handling these challenges, even though they persist today. Those positives are an inspiring leadership, a determination, as I said, to reach these goals and targets, and very well laid out roadmaps to go towards that. From the foreign policy perspective, we continue to engage in conversations and engagements with partners around the world. I would like to think that we bring value to all of the forums that we are part of. We are by no means freeloaders on the international system. I would be the first to confess that we don't have the deepest pockets, but we do bring a lot of creativity and innovation to the table when it comes to development partnerships, especially with countries in our neighborhood and countries of the global south, whether it's in terms of capacity building or infrastructure creation, things like the digital partnership, digital infrastructure, and based on the India stack and many others. So while the challenges will be there and they will change, and everything else that is there out on the international sphere is a moving target in many ways. I think given the determination, the leadership, the vision that is at the heart of Viksit Bharat, we will, I'm reasonably confident that we have it in us to handle these challenges en route to Viksit Bharat 2047.
Sir, with your permission, can I ask you a tough question?
The only tough questions. What is an easy
So,
question?
both as the foreign secretary and as the deputy national security advisor, you've studied, perhaps even handled complex situations. Now, I'm going to give you three relationships. Which of these would be the most difficult to resolve? Three global relationships, global issues that are currently, agitating all of us. Which would you find the most difficult to resolve? The US-Russia relationship, the US-China relationship, or the US and EU relationship?
You're really naming a lot of countries, aren't you? You know, I answered multiple choice questions 37 years ago, but I I did that because that was a condition precedent to getting this job. Since then, all the time that I have been in the diplomatic service, I've learned not to answer multiple choice questions. But more seriously, you know, I think all of the dyads that you have referenced in your question, while of course you have the United States at one end of all of those dyads for good reason, I think amongst the other characters, there are equally important dyads that need attention. And I would in particular say that the Russia-Europe dyad is one that should get a lot of attention and focus, because that, in a sense, may hold the keys to the resolution of a lot of other issues. Keep in mind the fact that this is also one of the dyads amongst all of these that where you have a case of two countries that are terrestrial neighbors, but also have a lot of stress in their relationship. So I think that's where the focus should be.
You know, I'm going to close this panel now, but I'm going to ask each one of you to share one idea or one important development that you believe 2025 will either be impacted by or may witness. One idea or one development. Choose any one that 2025 would witness or be influenced by. And Carl, can I start with you? And now you can name the country.
My hope would, of course, be that we get the end of the open hostilities in the war that we have in Europe. I'm not saying peace, because peace is a far more elusive and difficult concept that will not happen. But the end of open fighting would be tremendously important. And I think there's at least a chance for that.
Minister Lührmann, and you can't, no, no one can, repeat an idea.
You read my mind.
Yeah.
I'm I'm also optimistic. So I think we will see in 2025 at least the start of a social media platform that is truly social and is neither controlled by American oligarchs nor by the Chinese government.
Mark, you have to top that. I am telling you, this is a European conspiracy against Raisina dialogue.
So called the drop the mic moment. So while it's coming in a challenging context, I think 2025 will be looked back on as a transitional year of when the global south realized and took accountability that it has to actually drive its own future and its own development destiny.
Marietje.
I want to highlight the role of women and women's rights with a bittersweet remark. We have fought for rights for centuries, if not decades, that are now being rewound in the United States, but they're under global pressure. But I'm also convinced that women hold the key to stand up to protect these fundamental rights, whether they are at stake at the ballot box, whether they're at stake for reproductive health rights, or whether they're at stake on technology platforms or with AI. And I've been very inspired by a lot of the women that I heard speaking here at this conference. So it also allows me to give you a compliment, Samir. I hope to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable as we close this conference. Samir is really good at giving women a voice, and he has done so again at this conference. So thank you very much.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I would note that 2025 is the year that the UN turns 80. And I think it's not lost on anyone that apart from all the security and development and growth crises that we see in the world, one of the crises that filters through a lot of other areas into the world is the crisis in multilateralism. Both global governance, in the economic sphere, in all other spheres. And therefore, I would feel that if, with everything that's going on this year, the challenges to trade, to multilateral finance, of course, governance, I would like to think that if the worm doesn't turn in 2025 with regard to the crisis in multilateralism, then I don't know what else will turn it. And therefore, I would like to see that finally happen in 2025, at least to see the beginning of a process in the United Nations to get into a better model of global governance.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful way to close this edition of the Raisina Dialogue. End of conflict, a new social media platform, or broader, a new approach to technology, the rise of the global south, both in terms of its own and others' development and aspirational needs, women leading from the front, and reset or rethinking or re-architecting multilateralism for the future. I think that was the sum and substance of Raisina Dialogue. Please join me in applauding this wonderful panel for their contributions. Before we conclude, I think it would be only fair, and you've all witnessed it, that if we could all stand up and applaud the wonderful young team at ORF and the young team at MEA who have put in hours to make that happen as we were on stage. Thank you, ORF. Thank you, MEA. And thank you, everyone, for making this happen. Thank you so much. And we take a bow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I succeed.
You are a reasonable man after all.
Thank you so much.